chat is. So got it. Anyway, so welcome everybody who's on live, and welcome to those people who'll be seeing the recordings. I wanted to give a few updates. We have had two sisters from Annecy, France join us. I assume it might be recordings, and a sister from Mexico, from Leon. And totally we have 479 registrants, but again, each session doesn't have the full complement. Now I'm relating to all the groups in a little different fashion, and we have 11 groups that are not online with us, but most of them watching recordings. So they're women in formation from Orange, and they're senior and mixed groups from Florida, Orange, Rochester, Toronto, and Baden. There are 3 associate groups. I think Watertown is operational now, but Rochester and Los Angeles are going to start calendaring these sessions come next year. And there are about 15 individuals watching recordings only. So who knows where we all are, but welcome everybody. So we continue to thank our facilitators that we're just going through all the F's with them, F for facilitator. Thank you so much, and keep on going with us. And Joan Gallagher, who's our kind of key tech person, is off today for a congregational meeting, and Jean McKinney from Boston is helping us. And we thank Pat Eichner and Jan McCormick because this is their last time with us. And Michelle,
No, Zoom.
Can you hear?
My temperature.
No, I'm fine.
Pat, do you want to put it on mute for?
I muted her.
Okay, anyway, so Michelle Lesher will be joining us as host from Philadelphia, and she'll probably have a buddy also. Now,
Could I just check something? Rosemary Fry in my book is F13, or else there's 2 of us for 11. F11.
what's your name?
Sheila Fortune.
Okay.
Oh, Sheila, that was my fault. I thought you were the one. Okay, all right. She
Okay.
needs to be added, Pat.
Okay, so Sheila Fortune should be who? Should be what number, Beth?
Probably F36.
And I'm Grace Sauvé, Toronto.
Grace, we don't have you down as a facilitator, so.
Which group is, oh, okay, got it.
Okay, are we set?
Sheila, or is who, with where?
I think I did Sheila as F36.
F36. We don't have high numbers yet, so who knows what's going to happen with facilitators. Anyway, thank you all for being part of this. But we want to introduce a new approach for how you provide feedback to us if your group doesn't get to respond, or you aren't one of the individuals asking questions. And what we'd like to do is have you put things in chat. So if you have a burning question or burning comment, and it doesn't get represented somehow, either through what Pat and Marcia say or the question and answer, if you could put it in chat. Now, do people need help with chat, or do you all use chat?
No.
No? Okay, so Pat, do you want to explain chat?
No.
Okay,
Please have Jan do that.
so you see chat at the bottom of your screen?
Yes.
Okay, so you press chat, and when you go into chat, you'll see you can type things, whatever, just type in my question, your concern, or whatever, and then press enter. And then it will be recorded. And then we're going to look at all those recordings and see how we can respond, or does it need to be built into a next session with Pat and Marcia, or what?
Beth,
So,
Beth,
yes,
can I please ask to please speak slowly? This is
Okay.
being translated.
very good. All right,
Sure, I think so.
okay.
She's one of, Beth LaValle's one of the,
My gifts is to talk fast, yeah. my shadow side. Okay, what we want to do, there's been so many mix-ups about we get this, we don't get this, whatever. So we're going to put on the screen what we call rhythm for materials, so you know what to expect and when to expect it. So Jan or whomever, could you put that rhythm for materials share screen up, please?
Come on, I hate this.
Did it come up?
Nope.
Okay, let me go back.
Yeah.
And we're going to send this out to everybody. I mean, I can verbalize it too, but I'd rather have you see it. There we go. So the hope is that Pat and Marcia will have the homework materials set to send out mid-month. Now, they've been a little bit late because we're all trying to catch up with the process. Does everybody see the, okay. And then I send the materials to the individuals and groups. Kristen has the regular list. The link is sent, and apparently a lot of people didn't get the link today, but anyway, we got to keep figuring that out. Is sent to do all of us by Friday morning by Kristen. So you expect the link, and then sometimes she adds things to it, might be a copy of something or homework or the question to be used for the responses. And Pat and Marcia asked if possible to have the primitive documents available to you during the Zoom session. Now, we had people last session really sign up at 1:20 in the morning. And so we decided, and we didn't have as many this past time, I think, who are on. So we're closing registration at 5 p.m. the Wednesday before the Saturday session. Okay, now the Survey Monkey, we were quite excited about the Survey Monkey, but it didn't quite work the way we wanted. And apparently a number of people didn't get the Survey Monkey. So the Survey Monkey will be coming out the week afterwards. Now we had 320 online for November, and we only received 84 Survey Monkeys. So they are really helpful for Pat and Marcia to see where you're at with content. It's helpful for us to see process suggestions and so on and so forth, and also helpful for this final report that we have as much material as possible from all facilitators and then all individuals who've been part of that. And if you can't do the Survey Monkey, if it's not your thing, and you have somebody who can, you can add your comment to somebody else's Survey Monkey. It sounds like everybody's helping everybody out with some of this technology. So, and again, we're going to send this out after, during the week, it'll be sent out. Two ideas came in for suggestions, and one was to have the break after the talk for the introverts. They said, the situation is we wanted to give the facilitators time to prepare the reports back. So that's why we put the break after the after the breakout sessions. And the second thing, it was a mixed bag about the 3 hours is too long. And we know there were a lot of mix-ups with technology last time, so we're hoping to tighten some things up. And then also you put things in chat. That was a lot of chats back and forth. And we hope that way it'll make it more relevant and will be zestful to the end of the 3 hours. Okay, so we know we're not receiving the information, and what you need to do is let me or Joan Gallagher know that you did not receive it, and we'll keep trying to figure out what's happening, that you didn't get the link, you didn't get the homework, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So, so I think that's it. I just wanted to talk about some really nice thing about the Survey Monkey. So Jan, you can take that off if you wish, please. We have reviewed, at least I have, I'm so excited about what everybody's saying. So many of your beautiful, fervent, grabbed by God responses, especially to Pat and Marcia, and you're asking for more. It's been absolutely powerful. And for me, it shows the charism alive and well. We want to learn, we want to be more. We're thrilled being novices again, no matter what our age. And it's just been very exciting. So keep it coming. And only 2 or 3 people, they have to be Rochester people, had many essays, which are well worth looking at. Now, the second thing we wanted to present, what our hopes are, what we're aiming for. So Jan, if you could put that screen up. The planning team has continued to be delighted with the energy and insights from November 6th, even though we had several little mix-ups. No, that's, yeah, there we are. That's it. Okay, so what we try to do is write kind of a mission statement, what we're hoping to have happen, what the context are for us.
And it was very, very, very well received.
So
no glitches.
So can we go to the next one, Jan?
Yes.
The hopes.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll
talk to you later. Bye.
They're in a different order than what you had.
Yeah, I keep sending them in the right order, but I guess we don't connect there. Well, anyway.
Yeah, I'll get it up here.
Okay. And again, it said it's being presented to you. So if you, and this is going to be sent out to you also. And if you have comments on this, we've done an awful lot of wordsmithing and trying to get the spirit of what we're about together. Please send that back to me. No, yeah, no, you had it, the hopes there. That's it. Okay. So if you could just take a little bit of time to read it. I don't want to read it all to you all. I mean, I don't know. So take a little time to read that.
Print needs to be a lot bigger.
Can we make it bigger?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, that's the wrong.
That's the wrong one.
Okay.
Okay, well then I'll read it then, and maybe that's, no, it's hope. No, it's hopes for Roots Alive.
I know.
Okay,
There it goes.
okay, there we go. Okay,
No,
So-
print, oh,
so
print is
I'll,
good.
I'll read these for people who, you know, I don't know if we can make it bigger actually on the screen. So
It's bigger
enter-
now.
Is it bigger? Okay, so everybody. can
Yes,
read
it is.
Okay, great. Okay, so then let's read it on our own. So the first part are kind of philosophical, spiritual, whatever, theological hopes. Charismatic. Fold your hands when you finish now. Now, again, this is going to be sent to you, so you can look at it in other ways. And again, if you see some things that need to be strengthened or whatever, we appreciate hearing that. The bottom part of this talks about the final report. So Jan, could you just take it down to the next page or part of this page?
That's all I have is assess the relevance.
Oh, okay. Well, let me read then. We wanted you to know the quote, what we think of the final report that we're going to be given. So we hope to keep data, you know, numbers of people and how many groups and so on. We hope to look through participant responses and the fruits of discernment that will be led by another discernment team who will report at our next session. And the hope is that there be specific articulation of direction for individuals and congregations out of what we might come up with, all the time being surprised by the Spirit and other things might happen. And then we want to also write in suggestions for what might follow from this experience, like the things came up last time on Francis of Sales and St. Francis. Well, maybe that would be a whole other Federation program rather than our trying to do that. And the document that we end up with would be made public in a variety of ways to be determined. It might include suggested processes for further exploration by interested others, in hopes that the seeds presented might grow ever clearer and stronger through the ongoing movements of the Spirit. So we might be a one-time only, but out of this, there might come, there we go. Oh, yeah, okay. So I just read what you can read yourself. So why don't we move on in the interest of time and for Pat and Marcia to begin. And the ending is simply a prayer that I've adapted. So could we move to the prayer, Jan? The sisters from Orange were the first group to send anything in to me with their responses. And I was like a teacher where the students got it. Somebody got it. So I asked permission. It's the Orange prayer.
Yeah, I'll get to it.
Okay,
We had to
I
put these-
realize you got to go through all these things.
Yeah, we got to go through the slides each
Yeah,
time.
okay. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Anyway, so the Orange sisters, they're 80 and 90-year-old sisters from Orange who I wanted them to read their own prayer, but they are all at a meeting today at Orange. So, and they know that we're going to do this prayer. And I'm just thinking, there we go. And I have just one little edit to the prayer. And let's read it together if we may, and then I'll make my edit afterwards. So let's pray. May we be challenged, moved, encouraged, surprised. Whoop.
I'll get back to it.
See, we're surprised by.
There you go. You are surprised.
Yeah, we are surprised.
Do you have it now?
No.
Okay.
Well, again, I could read it. I'll read it and we'll send it out to you so you can pray it on your own. May we be challenged, moved, encouraged, and surprised by the richness of the content we are finding in Roots Alive in the 21st century. In regard to accatamiento and reverencia, may we be captivated by a sense of and drawn to the dimensionless love of God. May retired elders, and I'm adding all of us, know how to bring this dimensionless love to others. May we live into contemplation of Trinity. May we not allow ourselves to have the charism, but be open so the charism has us. And may we remember to love one another as we love the dear neighbor. and may our love uplift. Amen. And happy Adventing
Amen.
all. And now we turn it over to Pat and Marcia. Sorry, it's a bit delayed. Pat.
Beth, what are we planning to do time-wise? I can't hear you.
He's speaking.
Take the time you and Marcia need, and we'll adapt the question and answer thing at the end.
Thank you. Okay. Last week, we spent a lot of time looking at the purpose of the congregation, because that really determines what the congregation is, what it's for, determines what it is. And this week, we're going to take a different lens, slightly, to look at who the Sisters of St. Joseph were and are. And that is through finding God in all things, a mysticism of relationship. This is crucial for the Sisters of St. Joseph, because our life is fundamentally apostolic. And so I need to revisit the purpose again, and also, excuse me, I'm getting lost here. I want to do mainly three things. The topic, finding God in all things, as related to the charism. That's the first thing. The second thing is the vocation of the Sisters of St. Joseph, as presented in these documents. And the third is the aids to an apostolic life. What were the practices that the sisters had that aided them, helped them to live this new vocation? Father Médaille calls it this new way of life. If you have your reglement, please open them to page 4. If you look at the goal of the association, these headlines in italics are not in the manuscripts. They were added to help people know where they were going. Look at that paragraph immediately there. It says the goal and purpose of their association will be that in God, for God, and before God, they lead a life, and what's in most of the manuscripts, of holiness. They lead a life of holiness. The Lyon manuscript, which is the basis for this translation, doesn't have that, but the other ones do. So let's say, lead a life of holiness, humble and lowly in the eyes of people, which they will find in the way indicated in these points. And then it moves on with the Trinitarian Consecration. So it says, a way of life, which they will find in these points. So the Trinitarian Consecration is used here to summarize, and also in a way to create the kind of life that the sisters are supposed to be leading. And the summary is summarized on page 6. So we looked at the Trinitarian Consecration last time, and he says that is the summary of the goal. And then on the next page, he says again to summarize. So now we have a summary of the summary. And I think these two paragraphs are absolutely dynamite. I don't know where they got that, hopefully. It's not in the French, but anyhow, in a spirit of complete humility, gentleness, candor, simplicity, and zeal for union with God among themselves and with every kind of neighbor, their continual care will be to make the dear life of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph live in them and in all their houses, and thus to revive in their times the spirit of the Christians of the early church. This is not a peaceable Nazareth where nobody ever gets mad. This is a prehistory of the church in this imagery. As for the neighbor, And listen to this. They will try to lead them according to their capacity to profess all the virtues mentioned above, especially the imitation of the life of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and the total double union among themselves with every kind of neighbor and with God. So he summarizes the purpose of the congregation as leading a life of union with God. That's for the sisters. Now here comes to me the dynamite. The second paragraph is practically verbatim. The neighbor is called to the same life of holiness as the sisters, the same degree of holiness. And the sisters have to keep in mind that that's what their life is about, that that's what they put their life at the service of. And so on page 6 again, it says, and to achieve this purpose more fully. So the purpose is in the Trinitarian Consecration in those 2 paragraphs. They will undertake all the spiritual and corporal works of mercy of which women are capable and in keeping with their social rank and activities, all done in the same lowly and self-emptying humility. We're going to find over and over again these conditions. They sound to probably a 21st century person like restrictive conditions, but what they're doing is saying you have to be real about this. And in the 17th century, it was a patriarchal society, absolutely, and infinitely graded. And the thing was to know your place and to occupy it well. Social movement was rare. There was some among the bourgeois, but very little. And so the assumption was that like would evangelize like. So sisters who were very ordinary, city people would work with city people. Sisters who were country people would work with country people. If you had any sisters, and there were some who were of a slightly higher degree in the society of that time, that they would work with those people. It's actually a very practical kind of consideration. What I think is important here, one of the things, is that the purpose of the congregation is linked absolutely to this Trinitarian consecration. And when we talk of God as Trinity, we're automatically talking incarnational talk. There's no reason to think of God as a Trinity without the incarnation, without the belief that Jesus of Nazareth is the Son of God. And so that is integral to early Christian belief and Christian belief all along. And that Trinitarian God is ecstatically outward, creating out of nothing, continuing to create, present in history, present in people. And so even because of creation, and even more so because of the incarnation. And the spirituality of the Sisters of St. Joseph is profoundly Trinitarian and profoundly incarnational, both. And they're related to each other. Ignatius, St. Ignatius Loyola, whatever experience he had at the Cardinal of the Trinity was what turned him outward. When he went to Manresa, he was into penitential, extremely rigorous asceticism, and something happened. He never could explain it, but he often referred to it. For instance, if he wrote something in the constitutions and they would say, well, why that? And he'll say, it had to do with something that happened at the Cardinal. So that Trinitarian experience is what really began to form him into an apostolic life, and eventually, of course, he founded a community that was totally based on that. The earthly Trinity is also worth looking at a bit. God, God the Father is this most perfect God. He's also dear Father, and we are to become godlike. Well, that's what the ancient Greek fathers said. They talked about divinization, continual transformation, becoming more and more godlike. The Son, of course, is the Son, the self-emptying of Philippians 2. And French dictionaries of the time give, the word, of course, is anéantissement. And the French dictionaries of the time give the regular understanding of that, which is destruction, annihilation. And then they say, and in religion, in religious sense, it's connected to Philippians 2. I found that very, very interesting. So the way Médaille is using it is something that French people would have understood not as destruction, but as this emptying of self in order to become human. The earthly Trinity, we have Jesus, the zealous Savior. We have Mary, who is absolutely faithful to the Holy Spirit, and Joseph, who is the model of apostolic life, of how do you relate to people. I find this extremely interesting. We could have been given a Jesus, the infant Jesus, the crucified Christ, but no, what's given here is the zealous Savior. And that's because the sisters were about the ultimate destination, realization of every human being, which is to be united with God in the end. And that's what the zealous for souls, ardently zealous for souls. So the sisters were to be ardently zealous for souls. And Mary is not described in terms of her motherhood, but of her fidelity to every movement of the Holy Spirit. And this has to do with a habit of discernment, a habit of responding. And all of these things were very particularly, as we're going to see, and connected to the apostolic life of the sisters. The vocation of the sisters, oh, by the way, notice that the works are means, they're not the purpose. It says on page 6. And to achieve this purpose more fully, they will undertake all the spiritual and corporal works of mercy that are possible for them. So that means that is not the purpose of the congregation. It is the means to the purpose of the congregation, which is the holiness of the sisters and the neighbor. They're called to become who they are in the eyes of God, and to help people do that. The vocation of the Sisters of St. Joseph is profoundly apostolic. St. Ignatius, when he founded the Jesuits, did not require, in fact, he forbade the chanting of the office in choir. The priests had to say the office, they were bound by that. But as an order, the Jesuits were not bound by that. And that was a hallmark, maybe the hallmark of religious life at the time. That's what religious did. This was a big departure from the existing model of religious life. Religious life for women at the time was cloistered. That was it. If you weren't cloistered, you were not a religious. And we can see that developing pretty steadily in an increasing manner. The 10th century reforms pushed enclosure for women more and more. I think it was Boniface VIII, but I'm not sure, in 1298 issued a decree called Periculoso, and it insisted that women be enclosed. And the Council of Trent repeated that. Now, these women went out, not en masse or anything like that, but they went out. And we know that Chaucer satirized the prioress, who spoke wonderful French, but she had a rosary, and the medal on the end of it said, Amor vincit omnia, love conquers all. That's very interesting for a prioress. And Erasmus did the same thing in his essay, The Eating of Fish. It's satirizing these nuns who are out, but not very religious. The Council of Trent, in its final day, ordered solemn vows and claustration for every woman religious and the suppression of everything else. So that was the church law at the time. If you were going to be a religious and you were a woman, solemn vows and an enclosed life in cloister was the only thing that was legal. As I said the last time, there was a space to move, and it was this, that the bishop in his own diocese was free to create other models if the pastoral need was great enough. And that was what began to happen in the 17th century. The Daughters of Charity, for example, they were founded to be servants of the poor. That is still their main work, to be servants of the poor. Our work is not limited. It's universal, whatever a woman can do in that place and time that most fulfills the purpose of the congregation. Whatever is the greatest need, if they're capable of addressing that. But, excuse me, this norm of women being cloistered was problematic for several reasons. First of all, if you entered a monastery, an enclosed monastery, you had to bring a sizable dowry because that's what would pay for you for the rest of your life. That and external donors who supported the whole monastery. So that's why in the preface to the constitutions and in the printed constitutions and in the manuscript constitutions, it says, women who desire to live chastely in the world, and are not called to religious life, that means cloistered, or do not have the money for it. So this is what this is looking at. And the Daughters of Charity grew out of a need in Paris, first of all, but then really all over France, for women of the lower classes to be able to do lower class work, because these women who were very involved in helping the poor were mainly noble women. And for them, it just wasn't fitting that they would wash bodies or scrub floors or carry soup. So they tended to have their servants do that. And it distanced these women from actually the people that they were inclined to help. So the Daughters of Charity actually were started at the instigation of a country woman who came to Paris and suggested to Vincent de Paul that she was willing to do this kind of work. And so eventually 12 of these peasant women gathered together and became Daughters of Charity. And they grew like mad. St. Vincent de Paul got papal recognition for that group, not as a religious order, but as a confraternity. That's how they did it. And they did not make permanent vows. They made annual vows, and they still do that today. Every March 25th, they renew their vows every March 25th. And they're free to leave if they choose to. In Rome, they don't come under the group of religious orders. They're a society of apostolic life. So by saying, no, these women are not religious, Vincent de Paul, and they weren't, was able to get away with it, I guess. And it's ironic that the largest female, feminine group of religious in the church is the Daughters of Charity, who aren't really considered technically religious. The Sisters of the Visitation, in the beginning, they were always contemplative, primarily. 2 of the sisters every year were appointed to go out once a month to take care or visit the sick poor. It's not that all the sisters are given to external works. 2 out of a community once a month went out. But that broke the law for strict enclosure. And so they made simple vows, and they did not have the status of nuns. They could get a dispensation and leave if they needed to. And St. Francis Xavier, Francis de Sales and Jane de Chantal were perfectly content with this. They said, simple vows, solemn vows, they're all the same in the eyes of God. But they were not in the eyes of people. And the first visitation that was founded outside of Annecy was in Lyon. And the Archbishop there just couldn't have it. He said, what if they leave? Wouldn't that just embarrass their families? What if they ask for more money because people with solemn vows couldn't inherit anymore? They were legally dead. And raises a lot of objections that really had to do with the class of women who were going into the Visitation order, which was much higher than the Sisters of St. Joseph. Just a look at the dowries that were required of Visitation nuns in comparison to the dowries that Sisters of St. Joseph brought in, they're not in the same world. St. Francis de Sales agreed to have them cloistered, and this is what he said. He said, he's writing to the superior at Lyon. But gladly, you see, my daughter, I speak agreeably. I acquiesce that it should become an order. That means cloistered. So that through the mildness of the Constitution, sickly young women might be received, widowed women might find a place of seclusion, and women of the world some refuge for their advancement in the service of God. So the primary thing was that they were contemplative, and they were founded to expand the possibilities through a milder constitution to women who otherwise couldn't stand the rigors of the existing orders. This brings up the paragraph inserted into the constitutions printed at Vienne, where it says that, by the way, Pat, I'm not going to use the visuals this time. Next time, maybe. Thank you. It says, first of all, about the Trinitarian Consecration, that the congregation is consecrated to the very Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, under the protection of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. So we no longer have this double Trinitarian image, for many reasons probably, but it's different. And so that in order that they would be obligated to glorify this Holy Trinity by the practice of continual practice in which they will seek what is most perfect and most agreeable to this Holy Trinity, and which was practiced by Jesus, Mary, and Joseph during their lifetime. So it's quite different. Then the next paragraph says, in all their conduct, the Sisters of St. Joseph should try to imitate and follow the customs, the spirit, and the life of the Holy Daughters of the Visitation, and will have a particular respect for their holy founder, St. Francis de Sales, and for all the religious of this holy order, and will do their utmost, all of this in their power, to adopt the primitive spirit, the original spirit with which St. Francis de Sales inspired them. So the Sisters of St. Joseph is explained in terms of visitation. They are an imitation of the visitation that is allowed to go out, that's not cloistered as the original Visitation nuns were. The problem here is, first of all, St. Francis de Sales did not think that the Visitation vocation was lost when they were cloistered. And secondly, for the Sisters of St. Joseph, they had their own vocation. They were not many Visitandines. And so in some ways, this is a red herring. It certainly gives credibility, but it really doesn't work in terms of a fully apostolic life. So what does? These are some, I'm rushing because I planned too much. Aids to an apostolic vocation. Find how to find God in all things. In the reglement and in the constitutions, there are practices laid out for the year, the month, the week, and the day. All of them contain important things for apostolic life. Let's take yearly. Every year they were to do a review of the year. So that's consider what had happened, understand it. Monthly, they made a review of the month and confession. Weekly, or bi-weekly, they were to consult for half an hour on the state of their congregation and the works of zeal ordinarily done. Together, the community does that. Daily, the sisters made meditation. After the meditation, the reglement says the sisters will get together and share with humility and candor their experiences of the meditation. So this is a review and sharing of the meditation. After the spiritual reading, the sisters were to have a discussion on what it had been about. And this is a very Ignatian practice. The daily examen, and the sisters did this twice a day before the noon meal and before they went to bed. So you have this continual review of where was God in my life today and how did I respond? And I recommend this booklet by Sister Joan Roccasalvo. It's a very fine explanation of the examen and some instructions about how one might go about it. What's happening is the sisters are being trained to a habit of discernment, a habit of we are going to be in places where the rule won't tell us what to do, where we're going to meet experiences and situations we didn't plan on. And so what is happening is the internalization, the interiorization of religion. And when sociologists talk about that, they're talking about their exterior. I can go on pilgrimage, I can say the rosary, all of these things are good. What they are related to is outside of me. The internalization of religion means that the meaning of what they're doing becomes part of me, part of my identity. And that's what all these practices are about for the Sisters of St. Joseph. Forming a habit of discernment so that they could be mobile and holy. And Marcia's going to take it up from there.
Okay, thank you, Pat. In internalizing religion, internalizing our bonds with God. Yes. So Pat has taken us through what Médaille calls the exercises that enable the sisters to keep the rule, to stay mindful of the consecration, the 6 points. How does that become internalized within us? Excuse me. And if we just pick out those little exercises, page 8, 9, and 10, we see that there's a flow of process that Médaille had in mind that would support our commitment to and in our consecration to these two trinities within this stimulating communion. And the flow is a conscientious determination to be conscious of God, to recognize God. And so we have to begin with, they share in the morning their sentiment that they experienced in prayer. What was moving in them during their prayer? What moved their heart, their mind, their spirit in their meditation? So instead of sitting around doing their ribbon making and or whatever it was, they and gossiping, talking about who burnt the cereal or something, they talk about how they were moved in their meditation, how they found God in prayer. The next little short exercise that we see in that group of exercises is that they take a few minutes, very short few minutes, to think about how did they find God in their work. And then on page 10 at the end of the day, they take a longer time to put those two things together. How do we remember all the ways that God was active in our lives today? And more importantly, or just as importantly, they add another exercise. How did we respond to that? And as Pat said, all of that process of self-awareness is simply the gathering of data, shall we say, through the week, the gathering of wisdom about how God is active in my life to take to the consultation once a week. And that's important, that's vital, because number one, it enables everyone to witness how God is present in everyone else's life. As I explain or tell how God was present in my life over the week, then others witness to this. And I witness how God was active in them. And then we weave all that together to find out how is God present and acting in the community? What's the communal response to God? And that today we call that the order of the house. But Médaille had a reason for that. He said, when they are working with other people in the direction of life, then they talk that over with prudent and virtuous persons. Well, guess who those prudent and virtuous persons were? They were the other people in community. Those women had gathered their own wisdom, talked it through together, come up with how communally they were in mission, and were able to communicate that very process to those with whom they were working on their own formation of life. So Médaille also, besides those little helps to stay mindful of how God is acting in our life, he offers Maxim 93. And I want to just have you look at that framework. It's on page 29 of the 100 Maxims, if you have that in front of you. But he says there's a little mechanism here that's easy to remember. Memory, intellect, will. And that summarizes those processes that we were just talking about in the earlier part of the rule, pages 8, 9, and 10. He says, don't just recall what you've been doing, but remember it. Put it back together. What were the people involved? How did you feel? What was your response? What was God doing in that moment of encounter or event, experience? And then apply your mind to it. How does this show that God was active in my life? And the reason the intellect gets involved is that very often the heart just kind of, how it happens. Your heart and your spirit can collapse in a day, and somebody asks you, how was God active in your life today? And you'll say, duh, I never gave it a thought. But in this little mechanism, Médaille is holding our feet to the fire. He is saying, yeah, you know, get a grip on your life. Look back over the day and think. Be determined. This is a fierce faith. Remember, put it all together and figure it out. How is God present in your day? Catherine Maury Lacuna, the late 20th century theologian, I love the way she puts this. She says, all God's energy is focused right here, right now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever is happening to you, whether you like it or not, God's energy is focused right here, right now. Believe it, acknowledge it, Médaille says. Remember little else than God. Forget everything else but this fact, and then resolve to see God in all of it. God's glory, God's incarnation in all of it, good or bad. And God's contentment solely. This is the way life is. This is where I am present with you. And then the will, he says. Resolve to respond positively. Go to God, love God, embrace God, and embrace this providence, my day. And so this little template, if you will, memory, intellect, and will, is what we use in those moments when we have the time to reflect back on what's happening to us today. And at the end of the day, what happened to me today? What happened in my life? How did I happen to others? How was I happening in other people's lives? Put it together, think it through, acknowledge that God's creative energy is there. God's potential was always present. This is how Médaille Médaille knew what life was like. He knew how often we numb ourselves against life, against how God might show up. We choose what Leonard Boff calls disgrace rather than grace itself. The ego gets ahead of us. It gets in our way. And Médaille says, no, remember your day and acknowledge how the potency of God, the creativity of God was always present. And you can say, well, today I lost my job. I lost my best friend. I lost my health. I lost the use of a limb. This was a day I don't think God was actually too much there. We've all been there over and over and over. And yet the fact of the matter is, Médaille is saying, no, God is not absent. God is present right there within this. And here is the potential for newer life. And some of the things that happen to us create a situation where we think, oh my gosh, I have lost my identity. I don't even know who I am anymore. Marguerite Porete, who's my favorite medieval mystic, says, calls God the far near one. When things get to looking like this, we think God is absent, but no, God is as near or nearer as God will ever be. The invitation for us is to acknowledge it as God's providence for me at this moment. Life happens and God accompanies us. One of our sisters who received a diagnosis of brain cancer, inoperable brain cancer, one time, after she died, the eulogist looked at her journal. And on the day of her diagnosis, she had written, "Today, Sister Death knocked at my window, and I welcomed her." What more can I say? This is the way we experience God in our day. Hopelessly awful, hopelessly wonderful, God is present. God is with us. So Médaille knew all of this, and that's why he gave us these little processes and the opportunity to consult with one another weekly. And then he gave us Maxim 93 to show us how it's done. Remember it. Remember me in it, says God. Acknowledge me in it. Acknowledge that this is the way your life can unfold most graciously, and finally choose it and choose to love God in it. Okay, so we're talking about finding God in all things and the discerning life stance. And to find God in all things is a discerning life stance. What we've been describing, that Maxim 93, that little template, that is a discerning life stance. And we've all heard it in even contemporary times. Remember in liberation theology, they used the see, judge, act formula. All that is a technique or a little template, a little mechanism that helps them to not just find God in all things, but it's a mechanism for discernment of life. It enabled a discerning life stance. So Bernard McGinn describes it in his treatise on this mystical life. He says, the formula there is to expect God, to recognize God, and then to respond to God. Expect, recognize, and respond. Probably most of you here this today are familiar with that wonderful play, Waiting for Godot. Does that ring a bell? Where the protagonist sits on a bench waiting for God. Godot is a play on the word God. And he waits and he waits and he waits, and a couple of clowns come in and they start talking to each other, wrestling with each other, and they go through all the motions. They finally leave and he's still sitting there. And in the end, he decides, you know what? God's not going to show up. I give up. And he leaves. And the audience is left with this total empty feeling. This play did not end the way we thought it would. And how often have we done that? Have we been in on that same bench that protagonist sat on? We wait for God, nothing happens. Wait for God and nothing happens. And McGinn says, look at the mystics. They expected God. They anticipated God. They got ready for God so that when God came, they recognized God. And how do we get ready for that? How do we expect God? How do we anticipate? What we do is what Médaille has been suggesting. We work with our day, the events and experiences of every day, and we understand the pattern of how God works with us. How does God work with you in your life habitually? What are the signs that God is coming or that God is here in a very special way? You're getting that nudge that you can't resist. What are the signs of that? How do you know it? If you're a spiritual director and you're working with other people, you know exactly their pattern. So what's yours? What's yours? I will make a confession here. Mine is noise begins to irritate me, sets my teeth on edge. And after 2 or 3 days of being driven nuts by noise that other people can't even hear or won't notice, I realize, oh, I'm getting the nudge. It's time for me to listen up. God is coming. God is here in a special way. So I recognize, with my eyes open, my ears open, now I'm ready for God to speak to me, so to speak. So what is your pattern? How does God get your attention? So once we expect God, recognize God, and respond, then we need to respond. How do we respond? What is your usual response? All of our personalities differ. Many of us say no before we say yes. A lot of us say yes without thinking and then find ourselves out of our depths. But the point is here, if we are faithful to these processes, expecting God, recognizing God, and then in the Médaille's template, memory, intellect, and then response, willing ourselves to follow God, then what we are doing is paving the way for our future. And what we're talking about here is a discerning life stance within a mystical life, a mysticism of relationality, the mystery of relationality with God, with ourselves, and with all others, then this is how our future emerges and unfolds. You know, the Jesuits say they find God in service. They have a mysticism of service. Betty Mosslander, who was a sister of St. Joseph of Concordia, coined the phrase after her study of our documents, particularly the consecration to the two Trinities, said, we have a mysticism of relationship. We live in a mystery of relationality, so that we find God in others, in other events, in the apostolic life Pat was mentioning, describing there. Our vocation is incarnational. It is deeply immersed in the world and profoundly, she said, profoundly apostolic. That we find God in others. Our union with God is accomplished in others. So tracking the circumstances of our daily lives and our responses, our natural reactions and our choice of response is how the God self is revealed to us, and it's how God reveals the future to us. The future comes to light in the present moment, as each present moment unveils the future. Every recognition of God in our lives is a step into the future, our future. So, you know, when you think about this, the future is not subject to some grand plan. We sit down and think up, plot out in 5-year increments and so on. No, the future emerges from within us, moment by moment, according to our decisions to accept God on God's terms in our daily life. And mysteriously enough, this propels us, impels us into the world. As Pat said, God's love is ecstatic. It is totally involved in the world. Stimulating communion with God, in stimulating communion with God, our own lives are ecstatic, totally involved in the world. But as a result of understanding and accepting God in all things, all created, all creation. So that God is not just personal, but God is very universal. God meets us in the world around us, in our local reality, in our global reality. And that's where we become more and more human as we listen to our inner self, in which God guides us toward union with ourselves, with God, and with all others. And this merging, melding of ourselves with God is the mystery of Kairos. Kairos is God's time. It's an infinite time in God's local time. And it is in us and at the same time outside of us. Kairos time is the time when interiorly we acknowledge that God is present no matter the circumstances. And this is how our future is revealed. It is our direction to action in this moment and becomes an action outside of ourselves for the world. Our insides meets our outsides and we are one with it. Paul, in one of his epistles, you'll remember, and Médaille repeats it in the Maxims, he said, "We're crucified to the world and the world to me." You'll remember that quote. Paul says, "I am crucified to the world and the world to me." In the end, that's about us. We are wed to ourselves and to all others. We are crucified to ourselves and to all others. And we are wed in this way to the present and to our future. Our interior life is union with the external life. And this is the mystery or the mysticism of seeing God and experiencing God in all things. And it is the outcome of a discerning life stance. This discernment is recognizing God where God is right here, right now, and always choosing in that context. Calls for our full attention, our full readiness, and our ability to say yes when opportunity presents itself. And we track all of this through these little techniques that Médaille offers. It takes years of practice so that it becomes a habit. We'll fail as often as we succeed. At the same time, it's how we learn compassion for all. Compassion for our past, for our present, and certainly for whatever our future is revealed. So I think to summarize, a discerning life stance is one in which we live the mystical impulse by realizing the mystery of God's continuous invitation to anticipate God, expect God, recognize God, and respond moment by moment. It might begin or be enhanced by occasional breakthroughs or religious experiences, but it is nevertheless the daily work of paying attention moment by moment to what God is asking of us and responding to it. Kairos time occurs in fidelity to Chronos time. This is the mystery, the mystical way of the ordinary, as Karl Rahner would say. And it's the way Médaille encouraged us to live our mission of total double union. We experience the mystery of every relationship, and we honor it and encourage it. We encourage that mysticism through those simple exercises Médaille provides as a simple means of living a discerning life through the context of God in all created subjects. In other words, our future might not be our preference. It is God's preference for us as the present emerges into the future. And what we pray for, of course, is that our preference will become, that God's preference will become our preference in the end. I think I'll stop here, and it's time to talk together. Thank you.
Okay, let's keep the breakout groups to 35 minutes. And we'll catch up at the end.
Okay, so I'm going to open up the breakout rooms here. We did not have enough people that I needed all of the facilitators. So
To tighten it. Okay, so first F4 Chris Boshin, second F8 Kristen Fernandez, and then F13 Lisa Gibbon. Are you all present?
It was 15 minutes.
And Christine, can you start?
There were only 3 of us in my group.
Yeah.
So,
Or do you have quality?
of course.
Okay, then go for it.
I think we were especially grateful for the emphasis on practice and the practice of discernment and the mysticism of relationship. So when we were talking about initially about the question of where is God in my life, that was what really struck the 3 of us as so important. When our conversation turned to concepts that we found to be essential, not only personally, but also to the congregation, the themes that came up, of course, were discernment, but also the idea of the life of holiness, to which the sisters were called, but also anticipating Vatican II, the universal call to holiness, so that all those whom the sisters encountered would be urged to live with the zeal and with the love that they were experiencing. We talked a little bit about incarnation as the 3rd theme. And finally, the theme of the dear neighbor. So these concepts seem to us to be very central to today's presentations. When we looked ahead in terms of takeaways, on the personal level, we were all experiencing the gift of Advent that came in today's reflections, because they are really a call to stop, to expect, to recognize, and then to act. But I think one takeaway that was very significant in terms of future of the congregation was the urging of taking the role of the agrégés and the associates as really a sign of hope for a time of kairos. And so we had the sense, and there was an associate present in our group who spoke about the zeal which she detects among the associates and looked to their potential contribution as being a very significant one in the future. So if we were looking for a pointer, that certainly was one of them.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Christine Fernandez, F8.
So in our group, we really appreciated these sessions, and especially today, this reminder and a challenge to experience God in every moment of our lives. And we talked about this 17th century spirituality and how it was fascinating and things that churned up at that time, and related it to today, where again we have this movement of this churning that's happening in the world, and we don't know what that'll give birth to. A couple of things that came up in terms of another thing that came up was it's hard to the double union and Trinity. We sometimes understand it, but it's hard to conceptualize it. And there's some days when I get it or we get it, and then some days when we don't. So verbalizing it becomes difficult. You may get it in your heart, but sometimes it's that link between heart and head. So we'd appreciate some future help with around that. And these programs, as I said, these programs and sessions are very valuable because it gives us an opportunity to have conversation. And in our group, we were across the continent, different parts of the continent. So it was just a great opportunity to come together. There's also, so that was on the more on a bigger level, but there's also state of the heart groups and all of the house groups that happen locally. So this combination of conversations at the national and international level and at the local level all feed into this state of, we're called to be discerning people, to experience God in every moment. So there's different opportunities and which are available, and we should take part in that or avail of those.
Thank you. Lisa Gibbon, F13.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Gibbon from the CSJ Archives in Cleveland from F13. We had a great cross-section in our group. We had lay employees, associates, and sisters. We represented Canada and all over the US. So even though we were a tiny group, kudos to whoever got us all together like that. It was great. We immediately started talking about the future concept presented by Marcia Allen, that the future comes to us by accepting God on God's terms. So how I accept the future, both of religious life, of community, of what seems to be the direction we're going in. And we kind of went off on the tangents discussing that for quite a bit. And we had some really great feedback on that. We discussed some of the the more prevalent themes, how to draw in the young people with intentionality, how to get the sisters themselves drawing in the young people. We talked about the future role of meditation. We talked about the future as far as what the implications are. And I'm an archivist, so my interest was history. So of course I was asking the sister about how did she feel about the future when faced with other great change. And so I hearkened back to that at the time that Father Médaille was presenting this to the sisters, it was a time of great change, and who knew what the outcome was going to be. And so how do we live with faith that the future is going to be positive? How does it rely upon our perspective of the future? And how do we embrace that? So again, accepting God on God's terms. Another thing that came up as far as personal insight was one of our members was saying how putting in this role of daily practices into our life, maybe re-examining where they aren't doing that, where they should be doing that more, kind of that whole examine. So I thought that was a great takeaway for personal reflection. And I think that's really about what I have to offer,
Great.
Margaret.
Thanks, Lisa. These are great.
Okay.
So Marcia and Pat, you have any responses? Have they gone?
No, I just had to unmute myself.
Okay, I got it.
I have to say,
Excuse me.
I have to say that, mute. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I have to say that I'm just inspired and kind of in awe at the depth of the reflection on these themes that are just so central. And I hadn't really taken it in as much as you reflected it to me, that this is really gathering people from everywhere in a way that wouldn't happen otherwise. So that'll reconcile me a little to Zoom. But I thought that the business, just one thing, that in the beginning, they did not know what the outcome of their actions was going to be. I mean, they could have fallen apart, they could have been suppressed by a bishop, anything like that. And I was thinking about how any relationship, in terms of mysticism of relationship, depends on trust. And the more intimate the relationship, the more trust it requires. And how to embrace the uncertainty of that when we move forward. So that was one thing that I thought of.
Marcia?
I was just thinking, Pat, and the element of risk that you introduced there, which is really where we live all the time. We live in the risk of relationships. And if we stop and think about that, we'd be scared to death. Betty Mosslander, one of my mentors, always said, no, you genuflect, Marcia. You just... But anyway, I was mindful of the daily practices that the last person here was speaking of. And that's actually the path to holiness and wholeness. And most of us, we won't recognize that probably in ourselves, but others might, or they'll talk about it at your eulogy. But it comes about through, we have an endemic spirituality that endemic to it is the dynamism of desire. And that's a term that Bernard Lonergan used to describe the basic human orientation. We're always desiring something and basically someone. And so that's the root of just about everything that all of you touched on, it seemed to me, is that this dynamism of desire. And Julie Harkins of Boston, who was on the research team that interpreted these and translated these documents, said that we have a spirituality of desire. And we'll see that in the maxims. But I was so mindful, the first maxim, have always in mind the end, the aim of your vocation. Well, that's the consecration to the two Trinities. That is union with self, God, and others. And it's a double union that is total. And like you said, Christine, it's very difficult to articulate. And poor Médaille had a hard time too, in the Eucharistic letter, in that one article, he just goes around and around. And you say, well, what did he say? We don't know. He just kept saying the same thing over and over. And I think it's number 22. Yeah. Here, my dear sister, is the purpose of our selfless congregation. It tends to achieve this total double union of ourselves and the dear neighbor with God, and of ourselves and all others, whoever they may be, of all others among themselves and with us, but totally in Jesus and God, his Father. You know, it's a union with all, in all. And that's the mystery of it. It's the finding God. Our relationship with God is accomplished in all others without distinction. There's the real mystery of the union, of the double union, and it is total self-giving, total gift. And, you know, we don't articulate it well. Médaille has tried to articulate it for us, but we can live it. We live it, I think, instinctively. That's what we have to be confident of. That's the charism has us. Somebody else said that. Charism has us. And so instinctively, we do what we need to do. We do what we're called to do. We live the charism and the mission of that total double union.
Okay, so let's go to our next three. The first, there's a little trinity we're doing here with three. Okay, so F12, Bob Fernaro, F17, Sarah Kane, and F18, Joan Coucher. Bob?
Well, thank you. First of all, I guess it's important for me to make sure everyone understands that I'm really not a sister of St. Joseph. I can share with everybody that I did marry into the community and have been profoundly active as a member. My wife and I have been associates for around 40 years, and we've watched the growth and transition of that. Our group, which was 7 persons, including ourselves, was really in a very exciting group, and some of the key themes that we caught were, number one, how do we integrate the profound sense of incarnationalism and Trinitarianism into our daily lives, especially when the challenge is to find God in all things. So in trying to determine the process of yearly, monthly, weekly, and daily, how do we do that? So there was an openness to, okay, I could do it monthly when our associate groups meet or when the small sister communities meet, but how do you do that every single day? That was a wondering, and it was, don't know whether it was an aspirational goal or whether a dynamic of faith. So that was a first thought, finding God in everything. The word was everything. And it was like, really everything. So I have to think about everything. And that even failure is God's presence if we're living for the moment. That was very moving and very profound for us. And if I may be so humble as to quote something that my wife said, because I have to stay married for another 50 years, I think that her vision and simplicity of the kitchen was really astounding to me. That the early sisters would regather in the kitchen, and that as day by day human experiences, they would share their lives and share their hearts. I thought that was pretty insightful. The question in number 2 about the presentation seeming to reflect our mission, we were struck by the fact that so many of us do so many different things besides being committed to the congregation. So we have a real estate people, we have doctors, we have attorneys, we have sisters who teach, we have sisters who are at home, sisters who are just being taken care of. We've got men and women associates who are involved in bringing the good news of the charism in many places, and that there is an energy about reflecting how the mission is not just locked inside the cloister, but how it is spread throughout the land as we do that in many different places. So we're we're very open to that discernment to see how God speaks to us, especially through sharing of the heart and state of the house in both a religious state of life as well as a marital state of life, or in the sacrament of singleness, however that happens to emerge. And I think the last thoughts that we had centered around where did the presentation lead us? Well, that was a very interesting conversation because I think we grew a few more gray hairs. Because what we recognized is God even gave us COVID so that we could be together on a Zoom meeting with 170 other women and men who are trying to discern the gift of the Trinity and the incarnation in a way that we would never have been able to do that before. And that somehow in the difficulty of this time of pandemic, we were given this light and accepted the light. We accepted that light to be able to bring ourselves back together again. And the last two concepts were, we would like to know a lot more about the mystical, the impulses, how to live by the mystical relationships and the mystical reality of identity in our lives. And while and the other story was the waiting for Godot. Loved the waiting for the example of Godot because they missed the opportunity to see God in the people that they missed. And I think sometimes we have to be able to, and we all thought sometimes we have to not take for granted rather, those who become a part of our lives are in fact God speaking through them to be a part of our lives. And so I'll just close with that because I could probably go on for another week, which I won't. And thank you for asking that.
And Sarah Kane, F-17.
Oh my goodness, Bob, thank you very much. We came from, there was a profound group of 6 religious together in our group. And as far as the presentation goes, we really found it depth-filled. Mysticism as a relationship, importance of music, all the helps that Médaille left us. And some said even though we're working with this, just like in Médaille's time, the discouragement that comes because of women in the church trying to make an impact at times still. I think all 6 of us agreed that we really need more time to sit and ponder over all of these thoughts. The whole sense of relationship, that as a young sister, we were given a foundation and we were given the practices. But as we grew and the dailiness that happened in our mission, somehow that the action, the to-do list, got more strength and focus than the relationship list. And the challenge that came there. That we're grateful for the chaos because it brings us further into understanding ourselves and what we're called to respond to in the actions that we're called to respond to. One of the challenges that came up were, when we're working with homeless, we understand and the poor and the marginalized. But when we're working with those who are behind the guns or behind the drugs or behind the other, the balance of what kind of a relationship do we build up, in that circumstance. And as we age, the struggle of just aging, that each era that we come into causes a kind of a shakeup of our sense of what are we to do, because the to-do list became more of an I am list. And that's a challenge there. And our mission today, I think the biggest was to live the life of mysticism in service. And we hate to say it, Marcia, it's still a challenge. And then where the presentation leads us, what would Médaille say or be calling us to if he were to see us today? with how, is he looking at us as thinking outside the box, just like he did? And what is that calling us to? I think as a group, we were so appreciative to hear that Marcia is working on something. We look at these great women who are so profound in their thinking and articulate. And when Marcia shared her story, what made her uncomfortable and have to challenge really brought a personal touch to us. We were very, very grateful to hear that. Someone in the group also shared that St. Joseph is a patron of introverts. We were a group of introverts, and we thanked her for that. And we committed ourselves to really holding each other in prayer, because this is a personal and blessed journey each day. And we've appreciated these presentations tremendously. Thank you,
Sarah. Thank you. And Joan Coucher, F18.
Our group consisted of only 3 people. I think each of us thought back to the fact that this whole idea of Father Médaille and all that the sisters was not a part of our history. This wasn't a part of the novitiate that I was part of. So just going back over all of these parts of the reglaments, the double union, all of that is something that I need to listen to to the presentation again, to get all of this to a more of a depth. The idea of finding our own space where we are called back to look at what is the next thing that we're being drawn to. I think in the looking at our examen at the end of the day, often we were looking at what was the wrong thing that was there, instead of looking where God was active with us and how that could be shown in the other areas through our searching in depth for this relationship to be growing. I think that the idea of what is needed more onto the mystical aspect of having Marcia go more into depth with this, and this may be something that's coming up. At times, she was moving too much ahead of where my mind was and my trying to do an intake on what she was saying. So I think that aspect of growing deeper into this mystical is something that we would look toward. We could be asking for the script of the text, but probably saying, redoing it again, listening to it might be the next best thing, because I'm sure the other is not something that's available. Being attuned to each other each day is something that is more real in places where there are several of us gathered. We've found that sharing of the heart is something that's really a growth into seeing God in our God moments and recognizing it and trying to draw each of us into that realization. I don't think we had anything else. As you can tell, I didn't have the questions.
Thank you very much. Pat and Joan, or Pat and Marcia.
Marcia,
Marcia to start.
could you respond first, because it was mostly about you?
Yeah, good point.
Marcia, we can't hear you.
Okay, Pat, I think you would have something to add. I know you would, because we talk about this back and forth all the time. Believe it or not, Pat and I are in dialogue a lot, and we learn something new every time. Okay, you talked about the total double union and more on the mystical aspect. You said, actually, those two go hand in hand. God, John 17 verses 21, 22, I think, 22, 20, 21, 22, those that, where God, we read God is in all creatures, God in all creatures in God. God is one. God is not split up in a little piece here and a little piece there. No, God is one and in all, and we are in God. And so all of us are in each other. That's a total double union. And that is a profound mystery. And that's what we're invited to contemplate when we contemplate that consecration to the two Trinities, that God's dynamical energy, to put it that way, maybe, which is totally all-inclusive and self-given and absolutely active in a dimensionless love. We're in it. It's in us. And all of us are in it together as one, connected family. I was just reading the other day, this author said, we can't even say the term, use the term each other anymore, because other means outside of us. And that's what Médaille is saying, that all of us are one in God. And so we don't understand it, but it is the mysticism, that's the mystical aspect of our lives, and it is the mysticism of our relationality with all others, all creatures. So I don't know. We will talk about mysticism, of course, when we get into the maxims, and we're going to do a little bit on the Eucharistic letter as we have time. So all of that is addressing mysticism. But some of you said it so well, you know, where do we experience the mystical impulse? Well, Bob, you said it when you quoted your wife, or when you asked the question, or when you said, you know, well, how do we do this daily? Because I only live with my wife. Well, really? There's and you said you wanted to stay married. Okay, you got the ticket right here. What do you talk about at the breakfast table? What do you talk about at the breakfast table? What were the sisters in Médaille's time talking about early in the morning when they got together? They were talking about how they were moved in prayer. And that's one great means of uniting us. You know, you can't argue with somebody who's telling you how they experienced God in prayer, or how they can't experience God in prayer, or how they're hungry for God in prayer. Pat, why don't you say something?
I think that what's striking me is that what you're saying, Marcia, about the mysticism of relationship and how to do it, is so close to what's there in the 17th century. But somebody brought it up, and rightly so, that some of these 17th century concepts don't speak without interpretation. And one of them is this double Trinitarian formula. And that was it was all over the place, especially in the first half of the 17th century. This idea of an uncreated Trinity and the created Trinity. Beirut, in the beginning of the century, his created Trinity was the Father, Jesus, and Mary. Really having Saint Joseph in there switches it around quite a bit. There are theological problems with saying a created Trinity involves the Son of God, but that's not really what's so important. It's that Médaille took this very popular devotional image and turned it in, which all the sisters would have known, and turned it into something that epitomized their life, and that the mystery behind it constitutes their life.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd have to say.
Yeah.
Okay, now, you want 15 minutes at the end. Should we do two more groups or, and then move into the end, or what do you two need? You said we'd say 15 minutes for your summation.
15 minutes, that'd be
Yeah.
fine.
Okay. So I'm just saying, let's have two more groups and then you can move into the summation and maybe not have general questions. Okay, so we'll have two more groups and then move into the summation. Corinne Dempsey, F6, and Nancy Marsh, F22. Corinne, are you in? Maybe Corinne's not here. Corinne, it's Corinne. Okay, Nancy, F22.
Sorry.
Oh, here you are, Corinne.
Sorry, I was just saying as I was muted that I wasn't actually prepared to report. I'm sorry. So I'll just be very brief. People were very grateful, and this is something I remember from the last conversation last month, of how so much of this has been, bringing up things that are very familiar but haven't been thought about in a long time. And so people are feeling renewed and reminded and inspired by things that they know are intrinsic to the tradition, and they're finding a real sense of renewal through it. This idea especially of being sort of mindful of God's presence, and this idea of the impulse, the divine impulse, and how to listen for that. And we kind of asked about what that meant. We're interested in what Marcia was saying about the noise and how that for her was a trigger, a pattern, and that was for a lot of us very unfamiliar. And it came up that everyone is so different. It's good to listen to different ways of being and different ways of being inspired, and having that kind of conversation and mindfulness of difference is important. We were also talking about the importance of looking at the historical rootedness of the tradition and the blocks that came up. A lot of what Pat talks about are these sort of barriers to moving forward, or these bishops kind of got around a rule. The way that things transpired, they aren't necessarily smooth. And sometimes it's with the barrier, we find new and creative ways of moving forward. It's the barrier itself. It's not despite it, but because of it, we have a way of doing things in a new way. And so we compared that to our current situation with COVID, and how with COVID, not despite it, we are here on Zoom, which was just brought up. If it weren't for COVID, we wouldn't be having these international conversations. So we're grateful for that. But at the same time, because the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph is about relationality, COVID has really put a damper on that. So there's an appreciation for real 3D bodies that we are not able to have right now. So people are really anxious to re-enter this sort of sense of the charism of relationality, apostolic sort of excitement that is supposed to be central. But in the meantime, we're learning that there are new ways, and by learning there are new ways of doing things, it reminds us that we need to be creative. So barriers also create a sense of possibility that you might not have otherwise. So that's all I want to say.
Thanks, Corinne. Nancy Marsh, F22. Nancy, are you around? Well, if she's not here, Marcia, Marcia and Pay, a couple of questions in the chat. But one is, could you say more about God's time? And the other one was taking the two trinities we talk about, and is there a third trinity, uniting these, these trinities with self and the dear neighbor? So is there like a triptych of trinities? So you're on for those things, Corinne and.
Okay, God's time. If I do this, Pat, will you do the third Trinity? But thank you very much for everything that you have been saying here. It's, you know, I'd like to respond to everything, but anyway, you're talking about the divine impulse, Karina, the last responder here. The divine impulse and the barriers. And going back to acatamiento and the stimulating communion in which we live and move and have our being. We live in God, God lives in us in a stimulating communion, in a communion that is always active. Again, I'd quote Betty Mosslander. She said in one of her talks, it was to the Federation Governing Board way back in the early 90s, she said that our charism is best described by an inclusive and active love. An inclusive and active love. And that's the third person in the so-called created Trinity, Joseph, the servant of cordial charity, where we talk about the inclusive, the neighbor without distinction, the inclusion of all creatures without any kind of bias or prejudice. And active, it's active, and a love that is doing what it is. A love that does what it is and is what it does. God's love in that first Trinity, uncreated Trinity. The self-gift, always giving, the totally inclusive and always dimensionless connective tissue of creation. The household image comes to mind. So every love is ecstatic and instatic. It draws and it moves outward. And that's the divine impulse. The Trinitarian love is instatic and it's also ecstatic, and it is manifest in all of creation. And so, and of course there are barriers. Of course there is the finitude of creation, which illuminates God's potential and God's creativity all the more. And that's where we enter into reality at a deeply contemplative level. It is a call to contemplation. Our whole vocation is a call to contemplation as much as it is an urgency to action. That's a both and. It's a wedding of those two seemingly mutually opposites, mutual opposites.
Yep.
Questions on the Trinity and the image of a double Trinity, and how does that include this kind of union with self and with the neighbor and with God all in one? I'll talk the self first. The examen in these practices are, it doesn't say it, but they reveal yourself to yourself. They reveal myself to myself. And the 17th century didn't talk about self in the way the 21st century does. So that's just one thing. I mean, some of the gifts of the 20th and 21st century are a better understanding of human psychology. For instance, if someone died by suicide, they wouldn't be buried by the church because that was final despair. And psychology has taught us that a different way to look at that, and the church has adopted it. But so anyhow, I want to look back at page 6 in the reglement. It says to summarize, and what he's summarizing is the double Trinitarian consecration. And so, in a spirit of complete humility, gentleness, candor, telling the truth about myself, simplicity, and zeal for union with God, among themselves, and with every kind of nature of neighbor, they will live like Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. This is an all-inclusive kind of idea. And even though it's not expressed in an explanatory way in the double Trinity, it invites contemplation. For example, what I said about the zealous Jesus, the zealous Savior. Think of how many different ways Jesus could be represented to us. But this is our Jesus, at least here. And zeal has to do with being on fire for something. And it's being on fire for the purpose of the community, which is union with God, with the neighbor, and neighbors with each other and with us. So it's an image. That's what it is. It's an image that describes, and to some extent, if they're conscious of it, constitutes their way of life, because it is it's this union of love that moves out. In the constitutions, it says the sisters will have no strict cloister, whatever, nip point. And because they have to go out, they must go out. That's part of their vocation. Whereas, for example, for the Visitandines, it was not essential to their vocation. It is to ours. These are great questions and thoughts. I really appreciate them.
So speaking of that, and then I'll turn it over to Marcia and Pat for the ending here. We must capture what was said. It was so powerful and it was so good. So please, those who did speak, facilitators, and those who didn't speak, and individuals who are inspired by all this, if you please write this on the Survey Monkey. It's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And if you do not get the Survey Monkey, call me, email me, or something, and I will make sure you get it. So with that, we'll turn it over to Pat and Marcia for summation. Thank you all.
How do we summarize that? Summarize the summary.
Well, Médaille did that. I bet we could do it.
Go team, go team.
You know, I'm just deeply impressed by the depth of response to the messages that are here. They're not my messages or Marcia's messages. They're messages that both of us have imbibed. And there's something going on. That's my sense.
And I think we can call this a Kairos moment. You know, it is where the eternal meets the temporal. And, you know, Karl Rahner calls it a temporal moment of temporal eternity. I love that phrase, a moment of temporal eternity. And that might be what this is, you know, where we contemporaries meet our history, our historical roots in a way that is transformative. And that's what Kairos does to Chronos time. It transforms it. A moment in time becomes an eternal temporality. And it's transformative. And many of you talked about that today when you were, those of you who were reporting back, you talked about that. How this moment in time is, as a matter of fact, considered transformative. And I would say it's certainly transformative for me. Just listening to you from all over the world, basically, and having the privilege of being present to you, with you, for you, is a Kairos moment.
I had said early on, can the spirit work through cyberspace? And I guess that's what I'm feeling also, to add to what you're saying. Whatever's happening among us, it's the spirit, which is what we hope for.
Yeah, to take COVID time and to allow it to transform itself into God's presence among us. You know, that's wonderful.
In
That's
unprecedented ways.
an enormous gift. You know, we were handed COVID. I always say life happens and then we make what we can of it, because God is essentially in it and in us.
So with that, should we say happy Advent each and every one, and Christmas will be coming before we meet again. So let's all say amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We got done a little bit early.
Thank you very much.